The Science of Student Behavior, Understanding Behavioral Function. The learning objectives for this course are to understand what students are communicating when they demonstrate problem behavior, and to identify a systematic approach for understanding and supporting problem student behavior. In education, we tend to view behavior based upon developmental stages and norms. Let's review a few basic tenets. We must study behavior to understand what our students say and do. Human behavior is a form of communication. Consider that infants are able to communicate with us through their movements and sounds. When we study behavior, it is an attempt to understand, explain, describe, and predict behavior. Educators may have an emotional response when disruptive behavior occurs, but when we reflect upon that behavior with the purpose of providing behavior supports, we are able to foster positive relationships and make a long-term impact. Behavior is analyzed in terms of interactions between the behavior itself and the environment in which it happens. This also means that home and school environments can encourage or discourage particular behaviors. Educators should be mindful to separate the deed from the doer. When adults use the term bad in reference to a student, they are conveying a belief that children are fully developed beings with complete control over their emotions and bodies. This is far from the truth. Remember that every interaction you have with a student teaches him or her something. Always take heed as to what that interaction is actually teaching the child. Educators are tremendous influences on student behavior. Consider that from ages 5 to 18, children spend nearly 1/3 of their life in school. When thinking about student behavior within the school or classroom context, it is important to consider functional relationships. As humans, we learn through our 5 senses. The most dominant in our learning are the senses of sight, hearing, and touch. This learning occurs naturally. When we consider student behavior based upon environment, we are better able to predict with a high level of accuracy that when X happens, Y will quickly follow. This prediction of behavior can be used for both pro-social school behavior as well as problematic student behavior. Let's explore the concept of functional relationships a bit further. Behavior is learned. Most especially, behavior is learned by modeling what others do. Behavior is purposeful. All human behavior serves a function. Humans engage in behavior for a reason. Behavior is escalated through successive interactions. Each time we engage in a behavior and get a need met, it increases the likelihood that we will repeat that behavior. For many students, it is more efficient for them to engage in the problematic behavior because they are getting an unmet need addressed. Behavior can be changed through an instructional approach. If behavior is learned, it can be taught, similar to how educators teach reading or math. Explicit instruction and practice of the expected school-wide classroom behaviors at the beginning of the year are critical to a student's success. Without explicit behavioral instruction, students will continue to fail the test every day, and this failure can continue into adulthood. It is not unusual for educators to confuse the function of student behavior with the student's feelings. Love, revenge, and jealousy are examples of feelings. Feelings are internal and nearly impossible to observe and measure. In order to analyze student behavior, we must rely only on what we are able to see and hear. As humans, we engage in behavior to fulfill a need. This need can be categorized into 2 basic functions. We engage in behavior to either get or avoid something. For kindergarten students on the playground, conflict may occur because one student wants to obtain a ball and does not want to share with their classmates. The underlying function of the behavior is to get the ball. We should address the function by teaching the student how to share with others. They are still getting the need of attaining the ball and learning to exist with their classmates. For a high school example, a student may have avoided first period the last 3 weeks by skipping class, and underlying their avoidance of first block is that they are failing the class. On the surface, it appears the student is avoiding the activity of first period, but a deeper understanding is the student is avoiding the emotional sensation associated with failing a class that they need for graduation. For school-age children, the functional behavior category of social need plays a large role in student behavior. Social interactions are a major influence in the lives of students as part of their identity development. Students tend to gravitate towards classmates that they find accepting and avoid individuals or groups that they consider mean or unkind. Likewise, students will also gravitate towards adults that they feel are fair and supportive and avoid adults that they feel are unsafe intellectually or emotionally. Understanding the function for student behavior helps educators to support the student's behavioral need rather than simply punishing the behavior with little impact and potentially pushing the student away. We have established that behavior occurs in response to the environment. When we analyze behavior in the context of the environment, it allows us to use an objective lens to understand what the student is communicating. An ABC analysis provides us with the objective lens and minimizes the emotional response to the problem behavior. Here are the 4 components of an ABC analysis. Beginning with the setting event, the observer describes the circumstances under which the behavior is most likely to occur. This can be the time of day of the week, temperature, or location. The antecedent describes the event which occurs immediately before the problem behavior. Behavior identifies the problematic behavior which is interfering with the student's learning or disrupting the learning environment. And consequence refers to the event or thing which occurs immediately after the problem behavior. This is sometimes referred to as the maintaining consequence and identifies the variable that is likely to encourage the student to continue with the problematic behavior. Consequence is always helpful in identifying the function of the behavior. It is important to remember that in behavior analysis, a consequence is neither bad nor good. It simply identifies what occurs immediately after the problem behavior. With an ABC analysis, the consequence should never be associated with punishment. Now let's take a look at the ABC analysis in action. Mr. Humphrey has experienced some challenging behaviors from a student in his class. He consulted with the school counselor and his assistant principal. You can see the analysis for Lucy, a student in Mr. Humphrey's geometry class. Starting with the setting event, the assistant principal reviewed discipline data and identified Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as the days when problem behavior is most likely to occur with the student. In reflecting on Lucy's behavior, Mr. Humphrey and the school counselor noticed the following pattern on those days. They first identified the initial problem behavior that seemed to start the chain of events for the class period. Starting with the first behavior, Mr. Humphrey usually passes out the Chromebooks at the beginning of every class. Under the antecedent, he remembered that Lucy will then put her headphones on and lower her head on her desk. Under consequence, Mr. Humphrey ignores her behavior, hoping Lucy will start working. On the next row, Mr. Humphrey asked Lucy to get to work. This time, feeling frustrated, he told her he will call her grandmother. That's when Lucy threw her Chromebook on the floor. Mr. Humphrey responded by calling the office for support. Next, the assistant principal arrived and asked Lucy to leave the classroom. Lucy danced beside her desk before leaving, and the classmates laughed. The team discussed what they felt is the function of Lucy's classroom behavior. What do you believe is the behavioral function or behavioral need that is maintaining Lucy's behavior? Is Lucy attempting to gain or avoid an item, sensory, or social interaction? How might the information under the consequence column help the team to identify the function? How might the information in the antecedent column support the team with designing a behavioral intervention to prevent Lucy's disruption and encourage her to complete her work? Students, especially young students, do not always have the words to communicate what they need in analyzing student behavior. Using the ABC analysis, we are able to gain an understanding into what Lucy may be communicating through her behavior. For this example, there are only 3 behavioral episodes shown. For a deeper understanding of problem student behavior, your school's counselor, social worker, or psychologist may conduct a more detailed ABC observation in order to identify the behavioral function with a high degree of confidence. After completing the ABC analysis, Mr. Humphrey and the team created a summary statement for Lucy's behavior. This behavior summary statement succinctly communicates to school staff, parents, and the student the most pressing concern. In addition to communication, the behavior summary statement also serves as the starting point for designing an effective behavior intervention plan. Let's see how the team transformed the setting event, antecedent, problem behavior, and consequence information into a summary statement. During geometry class, when Mr. Humphrey begins instruction, Lucy refuses to work and disrupts class in order to avoid feeling frustrated with her inability to complete the classwork. Without the ABC analysis, the team might automatically assume that Lucy is engaging in the disruptive behavior to gain peer attention based upon her classmates' laughter. But when we consider that the behaviors initially started when Mr. Humphrey passed out the Chromebooks, it's also possible the underlying cause of the disruptive behavior is directly related to Lucy's struggles in geometry. So while Lucy may start out to engage in the disruptive behavior to avoid her feelings of frustration, over time she may continue the behavior to gain peer attention and their approval, which is still an avoidance of her feelings of frustration. Many students engage in the problem behavior because it is more efficient and effective in getting their behavioral needs met. For Lucy, demonstrating the disruptive behavior gets her out of the classroom rather quickly without having to face her inability to learn at the same rate as her peers. From this example, you are able to see that the ABC behavior summary statement is the starting point for designing an effective behavior intervention plan for Lucy. The design of effective behavioral interventions is most efficient when based upon basic functional behavior assessment information. This information includes who engaged in the problem behavior, what problem behaviors were performed, where or when. These are situations associated with the behavior. Keep in mind that environments may encourage or discourage student behavior. And finally, why do the problem behaviors occur? This is a critical piece of the puzzle for understanding the purpose of behavior. You have reached the conclusion of this course. In this course, you have learned problem student behavior is a form of communication. Educators must analyze behavior to understand what students are saying and doing. Behavior has 2 main functions, to get or to avoid. The function identifies the behavioral need. Behavior can be described and predicted using an antecedent behavior consequence analysis. This is the first step in developing a behavior summary statement and the design of effective behavior intervention plans. For additional information and tools, contact your school's behavior support team.